must keep you from putting our kids in the ground, so we can't stand down. No, we won't back down. We won't back down, baby. There ain't no easy way out. We can't stand down, brother. So we'll stand our ground. And no, we won't back down. 'Cause we know what's right. And we got plenty of fight. And if you think you're gonna keep pushing us around, well, you'll lose that crown. 'Cause we won't back down. We won't back down, baby. There ain't no easy way out. We can't back down, brother. We've gotta stand our ground. And no, we won't back down. You know, it's pretty clear. If these lunatics think they have the right to strip us of our rights of self-defense, and if they're willing to do that, what else are they willing to do? We won't back down, baby. There ain't no easy way out. We can't back down, brother. No, we won't back down. Back down, baby. There ain't no easy way out. We can't back down, brother. We've gotta stand our ground. So we won't back down. No, we won't back down. Virginians, you won't fight this fight alone.
I can't hear you, Pat.
It wouldn't be a live stream without technical difficulties.
It wouldn't.
Hello,
It's just-
everyone.
Yeah.
Pat is trying to see if you all can read lips.
Let's see. Let's look at the comments coming in.
Hello, everyone.
Maybe it's just you and I that can't hear Pat. Can you out there hear her?
She took the earpiece out.
Oh, I still can't hear her. Yeah, I've seen that happen before. Right when we cut off from the intro song, suddenly things can go south.
No audio.
No audio from Pat. Okay, so it's not you and me imagining things.
Yeah.
Well, we can have the Phil and Jill show. Well, we're waiting and there's Jim.
What would we talk about, Phil?
Well, we can, you know.
We can do the gun stuff, but
Can you
Phil
hear
and
us, Jim?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah.
yay! We hear
Okay.
you.
Well, we'll wait for
rebooted
Pat.
the way it
One more
works.
for Pat. Come on, Pat.
Oh no.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. So,
Just
well,
hold
we
up
can.
signs.
Yeah. The trouble is, I think she can only do so much without losing the whole setup for everybody, I think. Can you hear us, Pat? No. You know, and all this stuff, it was working fine before you played the song. I don't know what it is.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there. Hey.
Okay.
All right.
We're
Woo.
Everybody
good
clap
until
at
my
home or wherever
Bluetooth
you're at.
dies. All right.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So Anyway, as I was saying, which nobody could hear, um, welcome and let us know in the chat where you're signing in from. We are really excited to have a special guest with us this month. Jim Irvine, am I saying that right?
Irvine.
Irvine
Like
is
California.
one of the
Exactly. No relation.
directors. One of the directors of an organization called Faster Saves Lives. And if you've seen any of the posts we put on the social media, we put a survey out there about asking people how they felt about safety in our schools. So, Jim, do you want to start telling people a little bit about your program, what you do?
Well, let me start by saying thank you, Pat and Jill. It's a pleasure to meet you and be on with you. And thank you, Phil. I met Phil, I don't know, many years
Long
ago.
time ago.
And he's one of my important people in my life that had gave me direction when I needed it. And I would never be all the stuff I've accomplished. Phil is one of the catalysts that got me going. So I really wouldn't be here if it weren't for Phil. I can't say thank you enough for that. So, so Faster Saves Lives. Faster is an acronym. It stands for Faculty Administrator Safety Training and Emergency Response. And we started it after the Sandy Hook massacre. And we worked with John Benner. He's really kind of the architect of this. John is a Vietnam era vet, long-time career law enforcement officer, a trainer, and he started in command of the first multi-jurisdictional SWAT team standard throughout our country now. That's John Benner's the one that really invented that. Had a medic on his team over 40 years ago. So he's pioneered a lot in law enforcement. But for us, the important thing was he worked with NASRO, the National Association of School Resource Officers, to train our law enforcement officers in our schools dealing with active killers, and did train the trainers. So he was their guy for many years. And what he told me was, he goes, finally, I realized I'm training the wrong people. The cops can't be there in time. They're not in the building. I need to train the school staff. But we didn't think we had, the schools wouldn't listen to us. They just, it didn't go anywhere for years. Sandy Hook changed it, and they started listening to us. And we worked with him. We worked with, we've taken stuff from Ron Borsch, from Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. And also really important, I think something other trainers are missing is we worked with school staff, principals, administrators, and parents, because the best gun stuff in the world, if it doesn't fit in a school, it can't solve a school killing problem. So we worked and put together this program, and to date, we have trained well over 3,000 people, 300 districts, in over at least 22 states. I believe it's the largest such program in the country. I believe the best because we went to world-class people who we considered were the experts in our country on various topics to help put this program together. And it's statistically insignificant. I hate getting into all kinds of stats, but the bottom line is there has not been a child killed in any of the schools where we have armed protection. It works. It's a deterrent. That's why the Secret Service uses it to protect the president and his family, except for Donald Trump, apparently. And we protect things of value, whether it's our politicians, our political leaders, our sports leaders, jewelry, the Brinks truck at the mall. We protect these things with armed security. That's what security is. And our children are our nation's most precious asset. They deserve the protection that our political leaders and athletes have. So the key is they have to have training. No, the concerns that always get raised, well, we don't want anybody just carrying a gun. We don't want guns left where children can get them. We don't want teachers using guns to solve fist fights. And it's like, great, we don't want any of that either. That's why our training addresses it all. So the schools that have reached out to us have employed this, and it's an ever evolving thing. As an airline pilot, one of the cliches, safety is not a destination. It's a journey. You are always working to be better, to be safer. And education institutions need to take this on and need to change their policies and procedures and do a better job.
Yes, and so another thing that you learn as an airline pilot is that when something goes wrong, it's not just one thing that goes wrong. There are a series of steps, and anywhere along that chain of events, if you break that chain, you can prevent the problem from happening in the first place. So, what you're doing with the Faster Saves Lives is teaching people how to recognize when that chain is headed that way and to break that chain before it becomes a disastrous event.
Exactly. So we talk about an accident chain in aviation. It's the same thing in school killings. You can go back and look at any of them. It's the same thing. And one of the frustrations we have with school staff, sometimes they want to replace the SRO with our program, or they want to replace other things we're doing. And we're like, no, no, no. This is an addition to. You want to break every single chain you can, realizing you're going to have some failures. So it's really important for them to realize this is not a panacea. We still need all of these things. That the goal is not that some teacher shoots down a killer in a classroom full of kids. The goal is that no teacher ever has to deal with this again, because we've dealt with it effectively in a complete totality of situations to work to prevent this stuff.
Well, let me ask you a question, Jim. So, our teachers, what is the main goal here? For the teacher to basically protect their classroom, or is the teacher heading outside of the classroom to try to intercept and stop the bad guy in the hall or some other place? What's the goal in this for the teacher?
It's all situational dependent. So we teach people how to be hunters, i.e., go after the killer and stop them, and ambushers, i.e., stay where you're at, and when he comes to you, then you engage him. So it's important to have both skills, because things can change instantly. Another thing that's important to know, everybody's armed teachers. We have a lot of armed teachers, but in a typical class, even though everyone thinks of teachers in a school building, teachers make up less than half of our class typically. The majority is a combination of the principal, the superintendent, the IT person, the football coach, the maintenance staff. We find are excellent at this role for a lot of different reasons. So whatever your role is, it's important to be able to do both of these, because your principal, he's not tied down to kids typically, so he can normally be a hunter and go after and solve this problem. But he might be teaching a class because a teacher had to step out, so he needs to know how to do an ambush. You might be moving your class to a place of safety or set up with an ambush, but someone else comes and you have a teacher's aide, or you can move your students safely to another teacher, another responsible adult who can take control of them and responsibility for them. That would free you up to go do this. Or maybe your kids are down at art class, so now you are able to do a role that you typically couldn't do. It also changes on the age of the children. We have to treat first and second grade kids are much different than junior and seniors in high school. There's also the relationship with you have. Even in high school, you've got mature kids, but the first day of class, you don't know who's who. The last day of class, you know exactly who you can trust and what goes on. So it's always evolving and always situational dependent. The key is school staff need to learn how to think about these issues and solve them. And we do that through situational training stuff and force on force training. And then also the schools need to give their staff the authority to make decisions. One of the failures we see sometimes is administrators want to write such detailed stuff that don't apply to the situation the staff's dealing with in the moment. And that causes delay and confusion because the staff wants to follow the rules, but they don't apply in the situation. And now what do I do? Do I put my job on the line? Is the school going to back me, or do I just do what's right and save this kid's life?
Yeah, they you can't pre-code this. Like you say, there's a million possible ways something could come down. Now, I'll say that, yeah, that's interesting, and it makes sense that the ideal situation is you'd have the hunters and the ambushers. Historically, I think of a teacher as being in a position to be an ambusher. Basically, she gets in the classroom, gets the students away from the door, and she gets in a position where she's not obvious where she's at, but she locks on that door with the gun. And when he comes through that kill zone, which is what it is, because he doesn't know what he's walking, the bad guy doesn't know what he's walking into. He has no idea who's in the room, where they are, if somebody's got a gun. By the time he begins to figure that out, he's already on the floor with a couple bullets in him. So that's actually fairly easy to do if you're in that position. Being a defender is much easier than being somebody. The second thing you talk about, where you're the hunter, that's a very different, very much more complicated scenario. And there you would need a lot of training, I think, like exactly what you're doing. I was going to point out that one of my favorite examples of how what you're talking about works, although it doesn't involve training, ironically, is Utah, where in Utah, anybody with a permit can carry a gun in a school. And they've had 0 school shootings in Utah. And a part of that, I think, is the same thing that you're doing in all these other states that are not as permissive as Utah, where basically you wouldn't know who to begin attacking. The plumber might have a gun, the teacher, the visiting parent, the postman. I mean, whoever comes in that building, it's an adult, could be armed. And it works there, and you're doing the same thing in these less permissive, and in a way, a higher level, because what happened in Utah is they've got all these people they can carry there, and because the deterrence is so strong, nobody's really had to test any of this. Nobody's tried doing a massive school shooting in Utah, so nobody's ever had to go to the point of actually pulling a trigger to shoot a bad guy there. So I can see exactly why what you're doing works so well and why you've had like 0 students being shot.
Yeah, it's interesting because what we see is, first, like I joke with educators, I'm like, if you want to solve a problem, let's start by studying it. And law enforcement is so good at dealing with criminals. Unfortunately, they're great at dealing with domestic violence and drug abuse and all of those sorts of issues because they got to deal with it every day. But our active killers in our schools are a different creature. They are not a criminal with criminal indicators like law enforcement thinks of them. So it's a different person committing a different sort of crime for a very different reason. And so we need different procedures and tactics to deal with them. And some law enforcement are outstanding at this. There's agencies they've been ahead of the curve on this for 20 years. But there's others that are lacking, and they're 20 years out of date in how they deal with these things. And that's why we see our body counts racking up. So they all have to be more responsible. But for our schools, the thing I want to drive home to them is, look, your job is the same as mine as an airline pilot. When I sign a flight plan, I become responsible for the plane, the passengers, the cargo, and my crew. It is my job to return them safely to Earth, point A to point B. If that's unattainable for a mechanical or weather reason, then I got to go to point C or point D or maybe back to point A again. But they're my responsibility to ensure their safety. There's no asterisk that says, oh, unless there's a mechanical problem, unless there's an engine failure, unless the weather's really bad, it's okay if people die. No, it is never okay if people die on my plane. Likewise, children, or the schools have custody of those children. They have a legal and moral responsibility to protect them from all foreseeable dangers. And we see schools whose policy is, we're going to dial 911. This is police's job. No, it's not. The police aren't in the building. The police don't have custody of your children. The school does. The school is the one with the legal liability in protecting those in their care. Not until police take somebody into custody do they have a duty of care on this, nor do the medics have a duty. They can't even get in and treat it till law enforcement goes through this. So you have to have school staff trained in the medical side of stuff. These are your kids and your responsibility. Don't put that off on somebody else, and don't blame somebody else because they didn't come do your job on your bad day.
Yeah, and some schools have resource officers, but that is not the answer by any means. Usually they have like one guy, and he may have to go to 2 or 3 different schools during the day. So you can watch and you can see if his car is parked out front or not. So if he's in there. He's almost always in uniform, so you know who he is. So you walk up behind him and blow him away. Now there's no protection in the school. Plus, you'd probably have his gun on top of your own.
The shooting at the Navy Yard. That's exactly how it went down.
Yeah,
shot the security guard and took his gun.
Yeah, if you don't know who's got a gun, that's this is what a lot of people, why they love concealed carry, is that they feel it's a tactical advantage. And sometimes it absolutely is. And this is an example of where it's a tactical advantage. You just don't know who's going to pop up and shoot you back. And it's powerful. It really is. You could have, shooting one resource officer is one thing, but you may have to shoot 15 other people in that building and think, and try to get away with what you're trying to do. It's not going to work. So,
Well, exactly. But also, these killers, they're looking to rack up a body count. I mean, our Columbine killers wanted to be famous. New York Times handed that to them on a platter. How can we help you out with that? Our Virginia Tech killer idolized Columbine. Hey, I want to beat them and set a new high score. He did. These guys keep track of the numbers. Our Sandy Hook killer wanted to surpass the Virginia Tech killer. And actually, he wanted to set a new worldwide record and beat the 72, I think it is, over in Norway. So these guys are keeping score. Guess what? All of them know you can't set a new high score walking into a police station and start shooting everybody because there's a bunch of cops there who are going to shoot you back. It does not work. The only way you can get this high score is you have to go to a location that has a collection of people where no one is going to be able to come to fight back and no one is able to stop you. It's the only way it works. They know it. That's why they have gone to our churches, our schools, sometimes hospitals or things like that. This are our typical no guns place. When we look at mass killings, they are in a place where the victims are not permitted to defend their own life. It's like binding up the antelope and saying we're going to help you defend yourself from the lion by cutting off your horns and tying your feet down. It's an insane idea that we need to, it was done for good reasons with good intentions, I'm sure, but it's a failure and we need to review that policy and learn and change it. Our kids' lives depend on that.
didn't that recent shooting in Georgia, where we had the recent shooting, and wasn't he also trying to beat a record? Wasn't he looking at the Florida shooting down there or something? I mean, I seem to recall that he too was trying to set a record. And this, like I say, just happened a week ago.
It was social media platforms that he was part of. He actually had information or mentioned information about Sandy Hook, Adam Lanza, as well as
That's what it was.
I believe he also mentioned Cruz from Parkland as well. So it was just a bunch of stuff in chats and stuff like that that he was part of on certain platforms like Discord or Twitch or something like that. And that's what he was using it for, was to talk about this stuff.
Just what Jim was saying. Yeah, he's keeping track of all this.
Well,
Pat, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't call them gun-free zones anymore. I call them defense-free zones because that's what they are. There's absolutely no way on earth you could ever guarantee a gun-free zone. You can't. I mean, we see it even with TSA and things like that, where they have the tightest security there is and they still miss stuff. There is no such thing as a gun-free zone. There are defense-free zones. And what you can guarantee is that the person that is hell-bent on the most carnage for the most impact because they're wanting to break a record or whatever, they're demented people, and they're going to seek out these defense-free zones because, as Jim pointed out, it will be longer before somebody shows up to stop them. And the one thing we know is that when you have somebody on a rampage killing like this, it's somebody with a gun that stops them every time.
Yeah, absolutely. To show the security theater, anyhow. I mean, there's a hospital here in Richmond. It's run, it's a state hospital, if you will. I went there with my wife to go see a doctor, and there was a side door, and there were actually two together, and one said, "Don't use this door, use the other one," and the other one was propped open. So we went through that door, and I realized we had just come in behind security. Security didn't even see us come in. We just went through a door that was open, and they have all this security. None of them looked at us. So I told Margaret, I said, forget it. I'm not going to self-identify as somebody that needs to be scanned. So we just went on with the appointment. And that was it. But that's just one. I can give you other examples of where exactly that kind of thing where it's like, wow, I sure wish I had a gun in here, because if I just walked in a door and went behind security, anybody could do that. And meanwhile, they disarmed me. So,
I believe
and
that's what happened with Uvalde. I mean, and they left a door unlocked or something like that,
yes,
or it was propped open. A teacher had just come back in from making a phone call. Correct me if I'm wrong. I
no,
can't
you're right.
remember,
That's correct.
The
but
the
I like.
Uvalde door was actually closed, but it was not locked,
Locked, yeah.
which was against policy at Uvalde, but it was standard. They were supposed to check the doors every day. No one ever did. No one ever locked them. You can only lock the door from the outside in that building. So the teacher could not lock the door or verify that it was locked. So it's again, we're back to our chain. We have so many failures at Uvalde before it ever happened. And it's really frustrating because Uvalde had a law enforcement response coming before he ever entered the building. And yet we still had massive failures and a bunch of kids die.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
we had the police standing there for how long before they went into Uvalde? I mean, how? So what good were they? I think they at that point they were zero good. You know, again, one armed teacher. If one of those teachers, even, especially one of the two that were killed, if they'd been armed, it probably would have been totally different outcome. In fact, if the student knew that teachers were carrying, like, again, the purpose of your program might never have even happened. Might never have ever, that day may have never come when he said,
Hmm.
I'm not going to do the school.
Well, Philip, you often bring up Utah,
Hmm.
that they allow concealed handgun permit or concealed carry permit holders to carry in the school. So a would-be murderer has no idea who is carrying and who is not carrying. It could be the janitor, it could
Hmm.
be one of the parents, but they're pretty sure that there's more than one person in that school that is ready to stop them from committing a mass murder. So it's the biggest deterrent you could have is the not knowing who.
Yeah, the not knowing where it is. And by the way, they did have one shooting in Utah, but it wasn't a mass shooting. It was a student that came in. He was mad because of something, and he shot himself. He just came in to commit suicide. Well, I'll show you. Boom, and he's gone. But he was not attempting at all to shoot other people. He went in with the intent he was going to kill himself, and that's it. But no mass
So
shootings.
one
So
of the
it's
reasons that I invited Jim on here and we have this survey going is because Virginia law, while there is a provision for schools, private schools especially, to hire security, that security has to be trained, and they have to go. They can't be current law enforcement. They can have to be retired law enforcement, and they have to be trained in the county that they would be working in for the school, and it has to be Department of Criminal Justice certified programs. So it's next to impossible for a lot of counties, especially the rural counties, to comply with this requirement that is in state law. And so one of my missions, my personal missions, is to get that law changed and to change Virginia law so that a school, especially a private school or something like that, that doesn't have maybe county resource officers that are assigned to their schools, they can hire their own security teams. I mean, our kids are important and they deserve the same sort of protections that the kids of the senators and delegates and congress people and all of those get for their kids.
Right.
yeah.
And go ahead, Jim.
No, I was going to say it's like your point on it doesn't work. I had a legislator years ago contact me, and he wanted this program, but they had all of these restrictions similar to Virginia, and I'm like, well, look, it's not going to work. He's like, well, that's what I can get past. I think it'll work, and we got it done. So they got it done. They passed it. Several years went by, and he calls me up and says, "Hey, do you remember me?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course I remember you. You got your bill passed. Hey, how's it going? How many schools are utilizing this, and how's it working?" And he goes, "None." And I went, "Well, what happened?" And he goes, "Exactly what you said would happen. It didn't work because we made it so complicated. Not one school could participate in it. How do I fix it?" And so legislators need to realize this. Look, failures, fine. We're all human. We all have failures, but let's look at what works and what doesn't work, and let's copy success instead of keep copying failures. And that's my message to schools. They do all of these things. They copy. Oh, we've got a camera, and we've got single point entry, and we lock all our doors, and we control this access, and we've got buzzers to get in, and we've got all of this stuff, so we're safe. And I'm like, you're hoping for 6 of your staff and 20 of your students to be slaughtered. And they're like, "That's horrible. Why would you say that?" I'm like, "It is horrible, but I say it because you copied everything Sandy Hook did. And if you copied everything they did, you must be hoping to copy their results because you're not insane."
Yeah.
Einstein's definition right here. And they're like, "Well, I never looked at it like that." And I'm like, folks, you have got to, we don't treat cancer the same way we did 20 years ago. If you did, it's called malpractice because too many people die. We shouldn't be doing school safety the way we did 10 or 20 years ago. We have to do what's best today. We want our doctors to treat us with the best knowledge that's available. Our children deserve that we protect them with the best knowledge, training, and rules and policies that are available.
Absolutely.
So, Jim, another thing that your program does is teaches the staff at the schools critical first aid for if something like that happens. Is that?
The guns get all of the attention. They're the sexy, controversial object that we're all glam onto. The medical is so important. You look at Uvalde. We had an hour into the event, the medics talked. There's a comment where they're like, "Hey, they've been bleeding for an hour. Be ready." I.e., it's going to be awful. They're going to be dead. It's horrible. They don't talk about going in yet because they're waiting on somebody to clear the building and invite them in. It's just a realization of we waited too long. We don't have victims anymore. We have casualties. We have dead bodies. And that's the reality of it. We train people how to use compression bandages, tourniquets, and chest seals. And the school staff has got to act to save these lives. In our country today, 90% of people shot with a firearm survive it. And two reasons. One, we start treating them. And two, our doctors are exceptional at treating gunshot wounds. In our schools, it's 50%. So it's 5 times the rate of anywhere else in our country. It's double the rate of getting shot on a battlefield in World War II with 60-year-old medical technology. It is unacceptable. Our school staff, and they're like, "Well, we can't do it." I'm like, "Yeah, you can. You've got people to run an AED. Why? Because everyone knows if you dial 911, they cannot get there in time to save someone whose heart has stopped. You've got to have the AED. Everyone knows you've got to have the EpiPens or epinephrine and a nurse administered to administer it because you cannot get a medic in there in time on anaphylactic shock. Your person will die beforehand." Well, guess what? Look at little Jacob Hall down in Townville Elementary School in South Carolina. He died. The school staff was doing everything they knew how to do it. They're putting an AED on him. And I asked people, why do we treat massive blood loss with an AED? No. Well, why are they doing it? And it's funny because every firearms trainer knows the answer. We've all said it.
Yep.
Because you don't rise to the level, you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to the level of your training. The school trained them how to run an AED.
Right.
And this is a bad situation. And they used it even though it did nothing to help him. And Jacob Hall is dead today. His family will never put the pieces back together because they didn't spend 3 hours training their staff on simple medical stuff.
I would also say another analogy to that is saying if the only tool you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah.
And so Jim, is the idea that they would plant maybe these first aid kits around the school so that kind of like fire extinguishers, so that in emergency you'd have access to a kit right away as opposed to having to go to the nurse's office and get a kit? I'm just wondering if they thought that through or what they do there.
Perfect analogy, Phil, because number one, we have a lot of data and laws on how many square feet or X whatever distance we need fire extinguishers. So there's codes on all of that. There's nothing on trauma kits that says how many you need that we know of. I know there's people working on it. So what schools do, to copy your analogy, is they put them in their fire extinguishers. They put them in the case where the fire extinguishers are. They put some trauma equipment because they're scattered at various places throughout your building already. They're already a place where you can store it. They have a window on it so you can see it, and people tend to know where they're at. So it's an accessible location where we can have these things. So yeah, schools actually use their fire extinguisher cases to put trauma equipment.
So what we would need to do here in Virginia, first of all, our ultimate goal would be to get rid of gun-free zones, especially the school. Kind of go to the Utah model, but the training you have would be excellent as well, at least for certain key individuals, or maybe for everybody. But it would be great if people didn't have to worry about gun-free zones at all. That's where all these mass shootings happen anyhow. But if we're working our way there, certainly the next step in Virginia, if we could get it done to accomplish what Pat wants to do, is we need to add faster training along with DJIS training, either one or the other. Either one would be acceptable for the security to be able to be an armed guard in the school, either faster or DCJS. Department of Criminal Justice Service. That's who trains our police and everything here in Virginia. Mm-hmm. That would be number one. And number two, get rid of that ridiculous, you've got to get trained in the county you live in. Who thought that up? What numbskull decided that was a good idea? Well, who would have done that? But again, I think sometimes it's like they put in a poison pill.
Yeah,
it's like,
exactly.
okay, we don't want this. We can't stop it, but let's put something in so that it's useless.
And look, we're doing something, but it's just not working. So we really need to make it harder for people to
understand and attain.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Do they have that? I mean, no one has that restriction. Hey, for our Secret Service, you can only train from somebody in your own county. No, heck, you want them trained with the best person we can find anywhere in the world.
I can't think of it.
The best people.
I can't think of anything else where we say you've got to do this only in your own county. That's absurd. It's probably unconstitutional. That kind of a requirement. You have to wonder about that. That just seems. But this just shows you what you're up against. It's not just here; it's everywhere. I mean, our rights are being under attack everywhere. I'm surprised you've gotten as far as you have with so many different states. It's wonderful that you're doing that, but it's got to be an uphill battle.
It is, but it's changed a lot. Actually, in the last 2 years, there's been more movement at the state level across our country than probably ever. So it's frustrating that it takes children dying before we can do what makes sense. And the reality is not enough children have died yet for legislators to take this seriously, or we wouldn't be having this conversation. And Virginia would have an excellent law instead of the tragically flawed law that you're dealing with. So the reality is we got to have more kids die before legislators are going to listen and take things seriously. But the more schools that realize this and take it seriously, that put pressure on those legislators, that gives them the courage to pass the law that is necessary to end these killings.
I might say that maybe that would apply to Republicans, but the problem here in Virginia is every delegate and senator at the state level that's a Democrat, every single one of those guys this year voted for every piece of gun control against people like you and me and the people listening to this. That was all aimed at us. Stuff that was aimed at criminals, they didn't pass. Like mandatory minimums for repeat violent offenders. Oh no, we don't want to lock them away for 10 years. No. As long as they get some kind of punishment, that's sufficient. That's the idiocy that we're hearing. So as far as I'm concerned, most of them are probably these school shootings play into their hands. Oh, good. Now we can push gun control. I think they're not as worried about those students as they should be. Their agenda comes first, as best I can tell. But it was for Republicans. Yeah,
same problem in Ohio, and you're exactly right on that, Phil. Absolutely.
it's amazing. We really need to kick some people out of office. They need to go. These are really some sad sacks that are in government that should never be there. They're not there for the good of the people. They're there for their own power, and cannot tolerate that. But unfortunately, it's like moths attracted to a flame. They just the wrong people love government because it gives them this power that they somehow lack in their lives. And that's why we're in a mess we are here in Virginia and a lot of other states. But it's up to electorate. If gun owners don't want to vote, then we're going to continue down this road. But if all these gun owners out there, especially the 277,000 that aren't even registered, if they'd register and vote, we could turn all kinds of stuff around. But I don't, somehow you
That's
got to
just
get
in
these guys.
Virginia. That's
You're,
just in
you're,
Virginia.
you're absolutely right. We're our own worst enemy.
Yep.
We gun owners can run the table in any election, from local school board to presidential. We run the tables on it if all we do is show up and vote for the right candidate. But we don't know how to fix that. It's frustrating as heck. You got decades that you have put into this, all of you and all of these other people who do so much stuff on this. And yeah, why are we having to fight so hard to make common sense changes that are going to save a bunch of lives? It's wrong.
So how many states is your program in now, Jim?
I believe we're in 22 now. Some of those states have just sent like a couple people to come train in Ohio, but some of them we've done classes in. We've done multiple classes in Indiana, Colorado, and Arizona. We've done Utah. We did a class in Idaho, I think, this past year. So it depends. If a school calls us and says, "Look, we want to do this. We've got 2 or 4 people trained or something like that," they'll come to Ohio for the training. But if we have a school that says, "Look, we want a whole district up on this. Can you come out here and do a class?" We'll do a class for them. The best template we've seen on this is to work with your local sheriff and have the sheriff host the class. That gives us access to his range,
Okay.
and it gives his trainers access to this training. So we each get something of value onto this. And then the one big thing is we foster the relationship between the law enforcement and the school so that they continue training. We can't train on everything, and we don't know what local things are going on. And there's recurrent stuff that's going to have to go on. We want the local law enforcement involved with the schools, involved in the training and working with this stuff. One funny story we have from a district over 10 years ago that started, he went to a sheriff and wanted the sheriff to qualify his school staff, shooting the same law enforcement qual. And the sheriff's like, I got so many problems with my own sheriffs. No, I'm not doing yours. I'm not dealing with a bunch of school staff who can't shoot. So he badgered him. Finally, he's like, the sheriff agreed. So the school staff went, fine, you got to do it on a different day because I need extra people to herd all your knucklehead people. Well, guess what? The school staff show up and they know this is the sheriff. They all shot a qual. Everyone passed on the first try. Sheriff had never seen his officers do this. So it shocked him. So the next year he's like, I'll do it. But he did it separate again because he didn't want the school staff to embarrass his police officers. But the third year, the sheriff got smart and he's like, wait a minute. I want your school staff to come embarrass my law enforcement because I can't get them to train. I want them embarrassed and we're going to do it. So that's what they did. This developed into a friendly competition between the teams of law enforcement and the team of school staff. And guess what? What we've done is we've raised the standard on both.
Right.
Wonderful.
And we fostered a relationship so that when that school had an event, their law enforcement officers know their staff because they've trained with them and they've worked with them. They are friends. They regularly go to events and shoot together. Law enforcement invites them in if they have somebody talking about mindset and they've got extra seats. They'll invite school staff. This is the relationship we want. This is where it's headed. It is so much neater than anything I'd ever dreamed up when we started doing this stuff. But that is what a successful school district looks like. And that is what a safe school district looks like. And it has paid dividends, both for the school and for law enforcement, in incredible ways that never happen unless there's that trusting relationship that comes from working with people and getting to know them and trust them over years.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, that's incredible. And I like that Utah came to you. Here's a case where they haven't had any school shootings, but they could always happen. There could be some crazy loon that's not, for whatever reason, isn't deterred by the fact that everybody could have a gun, including him in the school. But that the school district looked at it and said, well, this is not a requirement at all. We would still like to get our teachers. Why not? Let's qualify the heck out of them just in case the worst happens. For a while here in Virginia, you didn't need to get any training to get a concealed handgun permit. It was up to a locality. And a lot of localities said, we don't need training. But and I'm an NRA instructor, and some of my biggest classes were in areas that didn't require training because gun owners wanted the training. They wanted to know the laws. They wanted to really know exactly what they were doing. And Utah was an example of that for schools saying, why not? Let's get some good training in here for our staff and everything. And I commend them for that. They didn't need to do it, but they did it just because it would just be a better situation.
What an example. We have a situation, the program that works. We haven't had any problems, but let's look around and see if we can make ourselves better. Isn't that what we want out of our educators and our mentors? Whether it's math or science or safety, we should always be looking for self-improvement on this stuff.
Absolutely. Always a student. Always a student.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you get on an airplane and the pilot's like, I know everything, I don't need to learn everything else. I have established safety. That's me. Get off. This is not the guy you want to go flying with. I mean,
not flying with that guy. No,
right.
He's the one that doesn't do the pre-flights and stuff too, I bet. So I know my airplane's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the program that you offer. It seems to me it would be advantageous, even if somebody doesn't necessarily want to be armed in the school.
Yeah.
Just knowing signs to look for, knowing how to react in an emergency situation, knowing first aid trauma to stop a bleed effectively and to prolong a life until the police come in, clear the scene, and then allow the EMTs to come in. All of that stuff is just so useful.
But I'll tell you what, once you have the training, you're gonna want to be able to carry that gun, especially if it's very realistic training. Because I know I did some advanced training. It was in a decommissioned high school in West Virginia, and they simulated a school shooting. And in this particular scenario, where somebody was walking around with an AK-47, they shot blanks, but firing it in the school building. I was one of the people that was chosen to be unarmed in that scenario. We were using, airsoft guns for those that were armed. And that was the most horrible feeling, that I was totally helpless. The best I could do was hide in a closet and pray they didn't see me in the closet or shoot through the door effectively. And I would have given my right arm to have had even the airsoft gun so that I could get it, at least hit the guy with the airsoft. That would have counted for that. But I would think a teacher that really went through this kind of scenario is going to go, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and carry a gun too, because I can see with the scenario what it would be like to be totally helpless. It's good to know of these things, like you say, Pat, but the being helpless and praying that you survive long enough to be able to help people with the medical skills that's tough.
And there are people that go through training like that and realize that they're not the ones that are going to respond properly. Not everybody handles an emergency situation well. And knowing that in advance and knowing how to get out of the way and not cause things to be worse is also valuable information.
Enormous. We have people almost every class that self-select out, just like you said, Pat. And especially like superintendents, well, no one's carrying unless I can carry, so I want to take the class. So these guys come through, but they're intelligent people. A lot of them have PhD. They're much smarter than I am. But this just isn't their skill set. And as the training goes on, they realize this has very little to do with shooting a gun. This has to do with problem solving and reacting and managing stress and dealing with multitasking and all of this stuff. And I can't even tell you how many superintendents I've had, school board members, that come to me on either day 2 or day 3 and go, look, I had no idea how intense the training was. I have never done anything like this. I can't do this. I can't complete your class. But now I understand required. Now I can go back and I can pick the right staff and send them to you to get them trained. I love your training. I love your program. I'm sorry. I wish I would have understood that and sent better people the first time. But it stinks because it's prolonging along till our kids are safe. But it's good because they're willing to admit they made a mistake. They're willing to admit there's something they didn't know. They've learned something valuable. They take that knowledge back and they make their schools safer.
And some people can't cross the bridge into taking another life, no matter how badly that other life should be taken because of what it's doing. Some people cannot cross the Rubicon on that. They cannot picture themselves shooting another human being, no matter what they're doing. Now, if they really were in the scenario where they truly were seeing stuff live, they might think differently, but they just can't quite get to that point. And for them, carrying a gun they just couldn't. When I was a deputy sheriff, I crossed that bridge, and those out there that have been in the military, they at some point they had to look in the mirror and say, could I take another human life in an emergency? My answer was yes, but I had to cross that in my mind before I became the deputy sheriff, because I knew it could happen, and I couldn't hesitate when the time came. I either had made up my mind that there are conditions I would take a life, or I couldn't, in which case I shouldn't be in law enforcement. So
That's why the defensive scenario, the defensive training is so important, because a lot of people, even those people that are afraid of firearms and they think that they couldn't take one, sometimes they do cross that threshold and they're like, yeah, I mean, like after the fact, they have the training, they do the scenario, and they're like, absolutely, because they go into that mind frame. And that's what I love so much about Faster, is because you cover it all. You cover the scenario aspect, the emergency aspect, the situational awareness, for those who are not so inclined to go straight for the firearm, do more of a less lethal type of way. But at the same time, it covers everything that we need to be implementing into our school systems. I'm a mother. I have a little one that's in school right now. I made sure that when he got to the point where he was at this age, he's in second grade. And I mean, immediately I started thinking to myself, I work too far away. I mean, all of these things are happening right now. I need to find a job a lot closer to where he's at school. And that's exactly what I did. I know that not everyone has that ability, but at the same time, I mean, call me a helicopter mom or whatever. I'm thinking to myself, what policies do they have in, because I read handbooks. I mean, as a Second Amendment advocate and activist, I read the handbooks of the schools ever since I've started. You read the Parkland, the Stony, you read them all. Let's put it that way. All of them are gun-free zones. No gun should be allowed on those premises, but yet they're still making their way in there in a violent and very tragic way. Why aren't we combating that in a sense that not only makes it a team effort where everyone is putting they're becoming their own first responder. I was going back to what Jim said earlier. When you are in that classroom as a teacher, I'm putting my child in the palm of your hand pretty much for almost 8 hours. That is pretty much half of their lifetime throughout their school year. I mean, and throughout their school term. I mean, as far as going through 12th grade, I am entrusting you with my child's life. What are you doing to protect it?
yeah, you only get one. That child gets one life. But Jim, I mean, when I think about this, I'm thinking, boy, a lot of gun owners just would like to probably take that course. I mean, even if you're not defending a school, I have because the lessons there could apply in a Walmart. They could apply anywhere. You could be out at an event somewhere, and an attack starts. I think that's the kind of knowledge that would be useful. I mean, police get that training, but maybe not as intense in some ways. SWAT people would. Most police officers don't get that much training in firearms. I think we all know that. They really don't. But I could see where this would be an appeal to just gun owners that want to go that extra step and really be trained what to do in an emergency and how to react to it and what it's like to be in an emergency like that.
Yeah, so it's open to the public now on a space available basis. This past year, we had room in all our classes, but we always want the SRO to come take the class. So schools are like, and so, first they're like, I'm a cop. Why would I want to go train with teachers? And look, I want your opinion on this class. I'll comp you for free. Just please come do it. I ask every person, was this worth coming to? And 100% of the law enforcement come to our class said, absolutely. One of my favorite guys, he was a law enforcement officer in another state, a big city, which is why they wanted him in because they couldn't do it without him being law enforcement. A big, huge guy. His brother actually played NBA ball. So this is like the size individual we're talking about. And he, at the end of the class, he goes, hey, can I make a comment? And we said, sure. And he goes, this really ticked me off. He goes, because I've been in law enforcement for 20 something years, he was. And he says, no one has ever taught me how to properly hold a gun. I have never failed a qual. I'm big enough and strong enough that I can do lots of things wrong and get by, and I was good enough. So because I was good enough and law enforcement is what it is, no one ever took the time to train me how to do this. And he goes, I'm so mad and disappointed that I have learned so much in this class that I should have known decades ago. And I wish I had that on camera, obviously. But we tell schools, send your SROs and let them see what we're doing and see what we're not doing so that they can work with staff and supplement things. There's so many valuable roles for that SRO. Hopefully you've got a good one. But so like a couple other issues that were brought up for training, we recommend everybody in the school should be trained in some mindset and psychology and some basic facts on active killers because it helps them recognize things. These things don't come out of the blue, right, generally. There's all of these indicators beforehand, and we want our school staff looking and actively looking for them and identifying them and intervene on this stuff. That should be going on in every district right now. Every person has a role to play in that because and we need to communicate and resolve that. There's estimates that our schools and law enforcement together stop over 1,000 active things a year. 1,000 they stop. That is awesome, but that's by actively working and doing this stuff. Even as good as that is, every year a few slip by. So when these events happen, you've got to have a few people, the right people, trained carrying guns. I don't care who they are. I don't care what their job is. I don't care what their sex or color or anything else is. Can they do this job? And sometimes people can't, and that's fine. We'll find other roles for them. But then you need more people trained in the medical when you do the shooting because there's typically one shooter and there's typically many victims. So you need many people trained in the medical stuff to go through this. And to one of my favorite stories from someone who's been through, to Pat's point and Phil's, on the whole mindset coming to terms with this, we talk about, look, when the bad guy gets shot in a movie, it all built up for us to hate him. He's ugly. You've got the spooky music, and the hero comes in and saves the day. We all cheer. Great entertainment. However, that is not real life. In real life, the person you may have to shoot down might be a child. It might be one of your kids. It might be a kid from your class a few years ago. That's not really a bad kid. He's a kid in a really bad home, in a bad situation, and you took time and you worked with him, and you got real progress. You love this kid. You did amazing with him. But it's a few years down the road, somebody else hasn't done what you did, and he's off the rails, so he come back to get you or your people. You haven't done enough for him. And so this lady comes up and she goes, wow, that kid's name such and such. She's like, that's not a hypothetical for me. I think he's coming back. that's why I'm here. But I love the kid. I could never shoot him. That would be the worst thing I could ever do. I can't do this role. So I talked her into finishing up the training. She did excellent at it. She's like, because she's like, well, I can't use this stuff. I'm like, well, how'd you do in the medical? Did you like that? Oh, I love the medical. I'm like, well, then that can be your role. Some of the stuff we showed on how to hunt down the killer, I'm like, you can use the same thing to clear a hallway to safely move your students from point A to point B because you know where he's at and where he's not. You could do that, right? Well, yeah. So I'm like, so this isn't a way for you. These skills find a way for you, work for you. So she called me about a week later and she said, man, I have not slept well in a week. She goes, I cannot get this out of my head. But she goes, here's what I've resolved. Shooting down, I forget the kid's name, would be horrible. I would hate to do that. The only thing worse would be to sit in that room or stand in that room and watch him kill the other 20-something children I love and not do anything about it. That's the worst thing. Can I get back in this program? I'm like, yeah, let's talk to your superintendent. But like Phil said, she needed time to make that journey in her mind to come to terms with how serious this is. Some people don't get there.
I was thinking too.
Take more time than others.
I was thinking too that typically if you have a resource officer, you would want him to handle, if he could, because he's got all the legal protections and all of that, to handle the situation. But if he's in a situation where he's handling it, he also has the advantage now that he's got backup. So if something happens, he can go handle it, but he has got teachers there that are backing him up because normally he's on his own till other police arrive. This would actually help in that scenario too, because he would know that if something goes down, he gets hurt or he needs help. He's got people there that are trained. They've trained together probably. And so I can see it's fascinating when you think about all the possibilities with this.
So just so everyone knows, we did not talk about all of this stuff beforehand, but you guys keep bringing up all of these stories pop into my head because of what you say. To Phil's point, I had a superintendent call me some years ago. He says, hey, I got to tell you about our board meeting tonight. I'm like, what happened? He goes, at the end, we said, hey, are there anybody want to make a comment? The school resource officer stood up and said, yeah, I would. And they're like, go ahead. And he says, I just want the board to know that I'm happy to be your school resource officer as long as you have armed staff. But if you ever end that program, I am done being your SRO. And they said, well, thank you. Why? And he said, because I'm the SRO. He goes, everyone knows who I am. Everyone knows I carry a gun. If we have somebody come into the school, I know I'm the first one to get shot. That's just the way this is going to go. And he says, I'm willing to die for the students in the school, but because I know I will fight back. And while I'm fighting back and while I'm trying to deal with him, I know there's armed staff coming to respond to me and to finish him off that he doesn't know is coming. If without them, I'm just dying in vain. I'm not willing to die in vain. I'm willing to die to save somebody else's life and be part of a team. Just letting you guys know that's where I stand on this. And the superintendent's like, I had no idea he felt this way. We've never had a conversation. He just offers this up at the board meeting. The board had no idea, but I never thought about it. But that's a mature mindset from that school resource officer who probably didn't start there, but through a couple years of having this and thinking about it and processing it and being a mature professional, that was what he came to. And I just think what a great example for all of us.
Absolutely. We are pushing the 9 o'clock mark. We've been on for about an hour. So I wanted to address a couple of questions that I saw in the comment. One, I had a few people say, we asked about if you have kids in school or grandkids in school and didn't ask about great grandkids. Sorry about that. If you have great grandkids, just check the grandkids box. But the main thing is, the questions about, are you concerned about our kids' safety in school and what do you think we should do about it? So just answer accordingly on that. Let's see. Yeah, so there was another question a little further back. Let me find it. Sally said, how near Virginia were the schools that you've done training in? How did you get buy-in for your program in those state schools and teachers, especially with people that are not against guns but don't personally like or want to have one?
So I don't know if we've trained anybody in Virginia or not. I know we've done multiple states on the East Coast and locations up there. I'm just not sure exactly about Virginia. The buy-in, it generally starts with the parents. The parents hear about this, whether it's on a show like this or some other news program, or they read about it, or they just their gun people are happen to know, VCDL and Phil or me or something like that. And so they reach out and we talk about it and they take the idea to the school, and the school's like, sometimes they're no, sometimes will send us more information. If they say no, you've got to just keep working on it. Like I tell parents, I don't even know how many parents I've talked to that have lost their kids in these events. 100% of them are damaged beyond my ability to explain. They go on with their life, but you lose your child, especially to negligence or something like this that was preventable. It cuts wide, cuts deep. That scar will never on their soul. And you don't ever want to be there. So don't give up on your school. We have multiple schools that, because the parents insisted, because if they say no, well, what else are you doing? Well, we've got this, we've got that. Well, so you copied Sandy. I'm not comfortable with that. We're entrusting you with our children. Then you need to do a better job. You need to take this seriously. You need to take a look at this and bring it up. And we have schools that look, it's funny. I've gone in and done school presentations and talk about it, and you answer their questions. And you know what? Even anti-gun people are appalled at slaughtering innocent children.
Absolutely.
They don't like that
Yes.
any more than we do. So that's why they want to ban guns, is they don't want their kids shot. They just haven't thought through it all. But once you address it as an adult in a conversation and help them along, some people, it's a relief. Like Mike Berg is sick. He's never coming with us. So that's just, there's people like that. But most people, you just have to spend the time and help them get to understand what this is. Because
Right.
I asked the school. So they're like, no, that is not. So in an act of killing, you're not calling law enforcement. And they're like, well, yeah, we are. I'm like, well, you do realize those guys are carrying guns, right? Well, yeah, but they're cops. I'm like, so why is it okay for them? If we dressed your staff up in blue shirts and stitched a little badge on us, would we comfortable then?
Exactly.
And they're like, well, no. And it's so you politely make some fun of their thoughts, but they've never been challenged on this. And you do it politely. You don't have to make a big scene at a board meeting, but take them to lunch and talk to them and educate them and help them understand. Look, this is not about pushing guns down the kids' throats or this agenda at school. It's about safety. We should all be on the same page on safety. We should all want safe schools. So let's work together on this. And again, I'm like, folks, we've got to update our policies. Doing what we were doing when we were children is not acceptable any more than my doctor treating cancer the way we did 20, 30, 50 years ago.
Yeah, Sandy Hook is how not to do it. Sandy Hook is how not to do it.
Right. And Sandy Hook's frustrating because they did so many things right, but didn't do it. And they had fatal failures. Whoever approved their plan obviously knew nothing about human psychology and active killers. They didn't understand how these events take place because their policy and their stuff was fatally flawed. But I to school districts, look at 50 plus year active killers. Look at what law enforcement's done. Every one of these things, they have an after action review and they look at things and they change and adjust their policies because they don't like losing people on their watch.
Mm-hmm. So a big part of the problem here.
And the doctors keep changing because they don't like losing people, and the schools keep repeating the same result, same thing, praying maybe it'll go different for us.
Yep. Right. A big part of the problem is that we have been conditioned. We hear, don't take the law into your own hands, don't take matters into your own hands, or just comply and the bad guy will go away. And the truth is, the statistics show that if you resist, the bad guys give up faster. You have a 60-some% better chance of survival in a violent attack if you resist.
Yep.
And especially if you know how to resist effectively, if you've gotten some training in advance, and if you have the proper mindset. So you can have a victim mindset and become victimized, or you can have a survivor mindset and take control of a situation and get the best possible outcome in a bad situation. The choice is yours.
Yeah, there's
Absolutely.
plenty of videos on the web showing somebody who completely complied with the bad guy and got shot anyhow. Did everything the bad guy asked him, shot him anyhow. So yeah, that complying is not is by no means a guarantee you're going to walk away. Nor will you be able to
Especially,
talk them
yeah,
out of what they're going to do. You can't talk them out of it, or
in
you
a
know.
mass murder situation, especially, the bad guy is there to murder as many people as possible. They don't want resistance. And with these mass murder situations, the vast majority of them give up or commit suicide as soon as they meet some sort of resistance, some sort of effective resistance.
Yeah,
So,
Yes,
that's a good point.
absolutely.
When was the last time we heard of a shootout going back and forth in the school? I'm trying to
Yeah,
think. When was there ever a back and forth? Usually, like
yeah.
you said, they either commit suicide or they give up. They don't generally get into a gun battle.
No, these events end because these are not criminals. Our criminals get into shootouts with cops. We have people go into police stations and do suicide by cops. They want a shootout. That's what they're asking for. These people are very different. They're not doing that. They're going someplace where no one can fight back. Why does someone go to Sandy Hook Elementary School and go shoot a bunch of 6 and 7 year old children who've never met, never done anything to them? Well, because those high school kids, they're big and scary. But even I can handle a 6 year old with my AR. That's the level of cowardice you're dealing here. So don't be afraid of them. Confront them. There's so many stories of them being confronted, whether it's with gunfire, with force, with physical force, even verbal force works. And school staff goes, well, why don't we just do verbal force? I'm like, hey, if it works, that's wonderful. Do you want something that works sometimes or that works all the
all
time?
the time.
Yeah, and you
You
got
know,
the case of somebody that would go up and kick a small dog, but if they walk up and they got a pit bull that's baring his teeth and snapping at them, they'll leave that dog alone because that dog's
exactly.
resisting. You won't mess with that dog. And it's
Yeah.
humans can do the same thing. You come at them and you're not taking any of their baloney and you're not frightened of them. It can really change things a lot.
And
so
some
to
things
get
we look at.
the system changed in Virginia, what we need to do, everybody watching this, share this with your friends and share the survey link with your friends and get them to take the survey, especially if they live in Virginia, because what we are planning on doing is taking the survey results to the senators and delegates at the General Assembly and saying, look, these are voters that have said that they care about the safety of our kids in school and they want armed security in our schools, qualified, trained, armed security in our schools. Here is a program designed to facilitate that, and it's a proven program in over 20 states. It's working. It is a solution that will solve this problem and it will gain you votes. These are people that have said they want this and they will vote for you if you get this through and pass legislation to facilitate
Yeah,
this.
and I was busy saying how the Democrats all voted against us that were in the General Assembly. Well, there's lots of Democrats out there that are gun owners.
Mm-hmm.
And if they spoke up, especially to their Democrat representatives, and said, "Look, I'm not going to support you unless you protect the children in this school. Here's what we need to do," then you would get some traction. If they suddenly felt they were actually threatened and they would lose their seat if they didn't do certain things. The classic example is what happened in Virginia this year when they had 40 bills that made it to the governor's desk, and he vetoed 38, and the other two he neutralized. But One that didn't make it to his desk was you carrying in a restaurant that serves alcohol. They were going to get rid of that. If you had a permit, you couldn't carry concealed in a restaurant that served alcohol. Magically, that bill disappeared into a committee that was never going to be heard again, hear any more bills for the rest of the year. That wasn't an accident. I know what happened there, just from my experience. A bunch of Democrat gun owners called and told their Democrat representatives who were in control of General Assembly, what the heck are you doing? I want to be able to carry when I go to a restaurant. So the Democrats took that bill and slid it away, so it just disappeared into the thin air. And that same approach, if we could get those Democrat gun owners going on this and understand about the safety of their children, we could get something through while they're in control. If enough Democrats stood up and said, "We need this, we want this," then it would happen. But right until we change the configuration of the General Assembly, we're going to need something like that. But if this word is spread, if we can get this out, shared on enough media to wake up a lot of Democrat gun owners to contact their representative and say, "We want this," it could happen.
Absolutely. So, Jim, do you have any closing words here?
Yeah, let me just say, as somebody who is involved, I am a board member with the Second Amendment Foundation, not speaking for them, but it allows me to meet a lot of people around the country and do stuff. I will say Virginia Citizens Defense League is one of the best organizations in this country for a state group. You guys who are living in Virginia, you are so lucky to have this group and these people working for you, and work with them and help them and support them to get this stuff done. Phil and everybody, you can't do it without the support of these people. So all the stuff you just said, I just cannot emphasize how important it is for everyone listening to actually act on this stuff and do it. And I know we're all busy and I know we're tired, but just understand this could be your kid, your grandkid, your next door neighbor that you would have to live the rest of your life because I was too lazy to make phone calls, to contact my representatives, to talk to them about this. Don't let that be you, because I guarantee you the guilt will haunt you to your grave. So get involved and support VCDL. It's one of the best organizations in this country. So help them get involved and do this stuff.
All right. Thank you so much.
You.
We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to come and talk with us tonight. And Jim has also offered to come down and help us lobby with the senators and delegates and talk to them in person about his program, firsthand information. So we really appreciate that. It's my mission to get this passed through the General Assembly and get this in our schools, because I just feel it's that important. My kids are grown. I have grandkids in another state, but I care about our kids. They're the future of our country. So, we really need to get our schools to be a safe place for learning. And I appreciate you coming on, Jim. And y'all go to fastersaveslives.org and check it out. And please fill out the survey. The link is in the chat box. So say goodnight, y'all.
I'm happy to be part of your program. I'm honored to come to Virginia and help you guys fix your law. I'll join you in that quest to make your schools safe. It's my honor to do so. Thank you very much, folks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Good night, everybody.
Night, y'all.
We'll see you in the next one.